Thank you, Sheriff. I'll start by a round of questions, and then we'll turn to Senator Durbin. Mr. Puerta, Ms. Noring, I think it's only appropriate that we should express our condolences for your loss. You know, when things like this happen, I usually try to figure out, well, is there any way we can take something terrible and tragic and hopefully learn some lessons and make things better and save lives in the future? And so thank you for being courageous and telling your story. I know it's not easy, but it's very important for people across this country to understand how this can happen to them and their family. And having visited with a number of families in Texas, its various school districts, I've come to believe that this requires a layered approach, maybe starting at the kitchen table with awareness of our children to the threat, because none of them take these counterfeit drugs knowingly, at least knowing that it will take their lives, that it contains a contaminated fentanyl. But I do believe it's going to require all of us, from parents, families, to school districts and local law enforcement, state and federal law enforcement, and border security. Mr. Sheriff Barnes, it's my understanding that most of the chemicals that go into fentanyl basically have been traced back to China. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Senator, there is an issue with precursor chemicals transiting from China through our U.S. ports and directly to China, yes.
And as I understand some of the announcements relating to the tariffs that President Trump has announced, his administration has said this isn't so much a trade policy as it is an anti-fentanyl policy to finally get the Chinese government's attention to do something about the precursors that emanate from that country. But then, as you point out, they make their way to Mexico, where the cartels are putting them into pill presses and making them look like relatively innocuous drugs, only to turn out to be contaminated with fentanyl and take the lives of people unbeknownst to them. Do you believe that with improved border security, we can begin to stop some of the flow of the illicit drugs coming across the border, including fentanyl?
Yes, Senator. What you described is a very complex system, almost a supply chain that starts in China, using transit, going to Mexico, the pill presses. It's not doing any one thing, it's doing 12 things simultaneously. So I do believe that addressing this issue is much more complicated than just any one thing. The HALT Act is a great start, but when you look at the pill presses, pressing pills, that's one issue. The border obviously is going to be the most significant issue as we shut down the border and the pathway for illicit fentanyl to make its way back into the United States. But it's that and many other things that have to take place.
So I heard Senator Durbin's statement, which I disagree with, that says that the vast majority of the fentanyl comes across the ports of entry transported by American citizens. Is there anybody on the panel who subscribes to that point of view? Dr. Farfan, do you think any one of the 1.7 million gotaways during the last 4 years have been transporting fentanyl?
1.7 million of?
Well, during the Biden administration, out of the millions of people that were welcomed into the country and released, there were 1.7 million that appeared on various sensors, cameras and things like that evaded law enforcement and made their way into the interior of the United States. Do you think any one of those 1.7 million individuals that were evading law enforcement were transporting fentanyl?
I mean, to restate what I mentioned in my testimony, data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission shows that 86.4 people sentenced for fentanyl trafficking in fiscal year 2023 were U.S. citizens.
And that's not my question.
I would also add...
My question is about the people who evaded law enforcement. Is it possible that some of them, or maybe even many of them, were transporting illicit drugs, including fentanyl?
As someone who studies organized crime, that would be a really bad business decision. Drug traffickers deal with a lot of...
It sounds to me like a very profitable decision on the part of the cartels to evade law enforcement and to be able to deliver your drugs, your load into the United States, only to make a lot of money from it. Why is that a bad business decision?
Because from a business point of view, you would prefer to have smugglers who have a legal right to entry into the United States than an immigrant who is uncertain whether or not he or she is going to cross into the United States. So if you're looking at it from the point of view of, will we turn a profit or not in this particular shipment, putting your shipment in the hands of an immigrant who does not have a legal right to entry into the U.S. is actually a bad business decision.
Sheriff Barnes, you agree with that?
I do not. There's two different facets here. You have the trafficking of the narcotic, which is oftentimes in large bulk. In our experience in intervention and interdiction, as those are oftentimes residents of Mexico, the distribution of that or sales of it, I think to Dr. Farfan's point, might oftentimes be carried out by U.S. citizens in the drug trafficking market. So it's a combination of both. But the vast majority of the large quantities coming across, has been my experience, are being conducted by Mexican nationals. The distribution and sales inside the continental United States oftentimes has been carried out by U.S. citizens.
Thank you. Not today's political adventure. I yield.
Good morning. I want to thank Chairman Grassley for convening this hearing and my colleague, Senator Schmidt from Missouri, for co-chairing this with me as we examine the constitutional crisis posed by the cover-up of President Biden's cognitive decline. The U.S. Constitution provides, as we all know, for three co-equal branches. Today, we're concerned about the chief executive, the President of the United States. As we know, the chief executive, the head of the executive branch, enforces the laws, appoints high-ranking officials, serves as commander-in-chief of our armed forces, can issue pardons, and can veto and advocate for legislation. But what are we to do when the president is incapable of performing these duties? Last June, the American public saw with their own eyes what many knew to be true, but would not dare to admit publicly. Our sitting commander-in-chief was suffering from severe cognitive decline, as evident by this video, which I will now show.
For what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare, wants to get away with, get rid of the ability of Medicare to for the ability to us to be able to negotiate.
As we now know, there was a conspiracy to hide the president's true condition by his family, by his staff, by the media, and many elected officials. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, who co-authored a book entitled Original Sin. That book amounted to a mea culpa by the mainstream media, but they summed up the problem when they wrote this. Quote, what the world saw at Joe Biden's one and only 2024 debate was not an anomaly. It was not a cold. It was not someone who was under or over prepared. It was not someone who was just a little tired. It was the natural result of an 81-year-old man whose capabilities had been diminishing for years. Biden, his family, and his team let their self-interest and their fear of another Trump term justify an attempt to put an at times addled old man in the Oval Office for 4 more years. So make no mistake about it, this was a constitutional crisis, bigger than President Biden, bigger than any single election, and one that cannot be absolved by the collective apology of the press and an election where the president's party lost. Current events, such as we are experiencing today in the Middle East, are a prime example of why we need a president with his full cognitive abilities, making important decisions involving war and peace. We should know, but we don't yet know, precisely what should happen when a president is unable to perform his or her constitutional duties. And that's the purpose of today's hearing. There are many unanswered questions from this scandal, questions that the authors of Original Sin failed to address in their book, questions that are foundational to the proper functioning of our government. We will address those here and shine a light on exactly what went on in the White House during the Biden presidency. We simply cannot ignore what transpired because President Biden is no longer in office. With a compromised president, our government's very legitimacy and capacity to function was undermined. The American people paid a price, from President Biden's handling of the border crisis to the disastrous events we saw unfold in Afghanistan. It's absolutely imperative that Congress grapple with these difficult questions, no matter how much our Democratic colleagues would like to simply sweep it under the rug. We need to know who was in charge during the last months of the Biden administration. Was it his wife, his chief of staff, nameless others? None of these people were elected by the American people, nor were they authorized by the Constitution and laws of the United States to carry out the duties of the President of the United States. The 25th Amendment provides a roadmap for succession in instances of presidential incapacity. Section 4 gives the Vice President and a majority of the President's cabinet the authority to challenge the President's ability to carry out the functions of his office, subject to a vote in Congress. But in this instance, the Vice President and the cabinet, the very ones authorized by the 25th Amendment to question the President's capacity, they did nothing. Are there penalties when the when the cabinet and the Vice President refuse to carry out their duties under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment? Should there be more accountability? The framers of this amendment acknowledged that the execution of that amendment would depend on the good faith of the cabinet and the Vice President. But Biden's cabinet and the Vice President did not act in good faith. They acted in their political and personal self-interest. This is the great paradox of self-government. Many of the rules, traditions, and institutions that sustain our republic are self-enforcing. The health and legitimacy of our democratic republic rests on the character of the men and women who serve in government. As a government, it is imperative that we have clear contingency plans when emergency strikes. And yes, it is an emergency when we have a sitting president who's unable to discharge the duties of that office. The concerns raised by this incident stretch far beyond the bounds of partisan politics. I will note that few of my Democratic colleagues are here today. Thank you to Senator Welch from Vermont for being here, leaving us with no other option than to take the boycotting of this hearing as an admission of guilt for their role in this crisis. We must not turn away from the search for answers, and it is not an overstatement to say that the future of our country could one day hinge on how we choose to act or not act on this very issue. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses this morning as we examine the difficult but necessary questions that must be answered from this monumental scandal. I yield to my colleague from Missouri, Senator Schmidt, who will now co-chair the hearing. Senate Subcommittee on Border Security and Immigration will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the devastation that criminal aliens have caused in communities across the United States. In particular, we aim to show the American people how the realities on the ground are very different from the narrative peddled by the mainstream media. Rather than truthfully and honestly reporting the facts, media outlets have spread misinformation, allowing harmful, false rhetoric to dominate the airways. The result of these falsehoods is that radical far-left activists have taken to the street and targeted and demonized the very people who are charged with enforcing the law, laws that Congress has passed, and that would be ICE immigration enforcement officers. The first false narrative I want to address is a claim that illegal aliens are not criminals, but law-abiding individuals. Neither the Democrats nor the media are willing to tell the public the truth. That the moment an alien illegally enters the United States, they have committed a crime under the U.S. law to enter the U.S. legally. America is a country of laws, and we expect anyone who wishes to come to our country to obey those laws. Another false narrative peddled by the far left is that illegal aliens are not receiving due process when they are arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This naturally begs the question, what sort of process are these individuals actually due? The idea that somebody could break our laws, enter our country illegally, and then be entitled to all the rights and privileges of an American citizen is a little far-fetched, to be sure. While the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution applies to all individuals within the United States, illegal aliens are not entitled to the same level of due process as American citizens. The fact of the matter is that by the time any alien has received an order of removal, they have had all the due process they are owed under the law. Most aliens with final orders of removal have been in the immigration system for almost a decade. Many have had the opportunity to have their day in court, the very essence of due process, but they neglected to show up. Another false narrative is that ICE is not targeting the worst of the worst criminals. But the fact of the matter is that as we speak, there are 291,141 criminal aliens in the United States today who have final orders of removal. Just this morning in the Senate Judiciary Committee, a comment was made that ICE is targeting gardeners. Well, 291,141 criminal aliens who are under final orders of removal are still in the United States. For this fiscal year alone, 213,279 criminal aliens with final orders of removal already have convictions, while 78,546 have pending criminal charges. Even more disturbing is the fact that 282,194 of these criminal aliens are still roaming free and not in ICE custody yet. There are many criminal aliens in the United States continuing to commit heinous crimes, even to this day. Some of these criminals are part of transnational criminal networks and organized gangs. All you need to do is look at the posters in this room to see some of the worst criminals ICE has apprehended recently: murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and sex traffickers. One of our witnesses here today, Sheriff Roy Boyd, can attest to the types of crimes he sees, even in Goliad, the Texas county with a population of less than 8,000. The Friday before the July the 4th weekend, Sheriff Boyd's officers arrested a 29-year-old Iranian national who entered the United States illegally, not once, but twice. The first time this criminal committed a violent aggravated felony in Indiana, and while he was charged for the crime, he received a suspended sentence in exchange for his removal from the United States. But his crime spree did not end there. Despite being deported, he returned to the United States again, illegally. And what did he do when he came back? He murdered a man in Galveston, Texas, a murder that was caught on video. Thankfully, he was arrested less than 12 hours later with the murder weapon still in his possession. This crime should never have happened. I want to remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that there was a time in the not-so-distant past when they agreed that criminal aliens should be deported. But it seems like amnesia has set in, especially because we now happen to have a president in office who's restored the rule of law and now requires enforcement of existing laws. Recall the deporter-in-chief? That would be President Obama. And who was in charge of immigration enforcement during President Obama's term in office? None other than Tom Homan, President Trump's current border czar. In fact, Tom Homan received a Presidential Rank Award during the Obama administration for his service as the head of ICE's enforcement and removal operations. The laws haven't changed since President Obama was in office. Only the party of the president in office has changed. And today we have a pro-enforcement president who was elected in a decisive victory, winning the Electoral College, the popular vote, and every single swing state. He was elected in part, in large part, I'd submit, because of his pro-immigration enforcement provisions, something 54% of Americans support, including Hispanic Americans in my state, many of whose families have come here lawfully and followed all the rules. American voters know full well that deterrence is an important part of immigration enforcement and preventing the flow of criminal aliens into the United States, which means swift apprehension, detention, and deportation. And that works. The Congress just recently passed what's been called the One Big Beautiful Bill that includes billions of additional dollars for ICE detention facilities and for more personnel to make sure that our laws on the books that Congress passed and were signed into law are actually enforced. The state of Florida has stepped up to the plate recently, helping the administration to open a detention facility that's come to be known as Alligator Alcatraz. I'm hopeful that other states will step up to help in similar ways. If we could find a way to make something like this work in Texas, I would strongly support it. And I'd encourage our governor, as well as Secretary Noem, to explore the possibility of locating future detention facilities in Texas. The far-left activists and the mainstream media who support their efforts continue to fan the flame with their rhetoric and misinformation. This is done with one goal in mind: to do anything and everything to undermine President Trump's domestic agenda, just as they did during his first term. And finally, I'd like to end my remarks with a reminder. We're here today to remind the public of the real tragedy of President Biden's open border policies, the hundreds of victims of criminal illegal aliens, crimes that could have been avoided if the laws on the books had simply been enforced. That's why we have two wonderful angel moms here today. First, Maria Vega, the mother of slain border agent Javier Vega Jr., who was killed August the 3rd, 2014. Javier's angelversary, as Ms. Vega calls the date of his death, is less than 2 weeks away. Javier died nearly 11 years ago, but the fact remains he was murdered by illegal aliens who never should have been in the United States in the first place. I was proud to honor Javier and work with the National Border Patrol Council in the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector to have a Border Patrol checkpoint named in his honor. I also want to welcome Tammy Nobles, the mother of Kayla Hamilton. This is a particularly difficult week for her because Kayla's birthday is July the 24th, this Thursday, and the anniversary of her death is July 27th, this upcoming Sunday. And I'm grateful that she's willing to join us here today and tell her story. Ms. Nobles said the most joyful day for her was when her daughter was born, and the saddest day for her is her daughter's heaven date, July the 27th. Kayla was viciously murdered by an MS-13 gang member who originally entered the United States as an unaccompanied minor and was released into the custody of an unvetted sponsor. We're honored to have both Maria and Tammy with us today to share their stories and tell about the loss of their loved ones and how it continues to impact their lives today. I also want to welcome Victor Avila. Victor knows all too well the price that our law enforcement officers pay just to do their jobs. Victor and his partner were shot by gang members. Victor was seriously wounded and his partner lost his life on that day. I intend to introduce a bill in the Senate to honor Ms. Noble's daughter, Kayla Hamilton. The bill will require that HHS conduct mandatory checks on all unaccompanied minors and bar criminal alien sponsors from being allowed to assume custody of such children. A similar bill was introduced by Representative Russell Fry in the House. You may ask, why is it necessary to pass a law to get Health and Human Services to do mandatory checks on unaccompanied minors and to bar criminal alien sponsors? Well, that's because laws barring that do not currently exist, and we need to make sure that this can never happen again. And now I yield to Ranking Member Padilla to give his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody.
Clarify just a few things. Ms. Fleischhaker, do you believe that everybody who is all individuals who are under final orders of deportation should actually be deported?
I believe that people with final orders of removal have gone through the legal process and then are eligible for removal, for deportation.
You don't think they should be deported, or you do think they should be deported?
I think that those are the people who can be removed. Those are the people who should be removed.
So there actually are some illegal aliens who should be deported. How about convicted criminals? Should they be deported?
Undocumented convicted criminals, those are the people who I think we should be prioritizing for removal.
Mr. Avila, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about otherwise law-abiding individuals who violate our immigration laws and come into the United States. First of all, illegal entry into the United States is a crime, is it not?
That's right. We call it EWI, entry without inspection. That's a violation of 8 U.S.C. 1325.
And in your lengthy experience in law enforcement and dealing with the border, is that the only law that people who illegally enter the country violate?
No, it depends how you enter, when you enter, how many times you've entered and been encountered. There's very different types of removal. I think we overuse the term deportation, but believe it or not, most people, most illegals in this country are removed without a deportation order. There's expedited removals, there's voluntary returns, there's many different types of removals. The actual deportations are executed by an immigration judge under that order.
So in addition to illegal entry, is it your experience that many individuals who enter the country illegally engage in identity theft?
Oh my goodness, I conducted so many fraud cases, including Social Security cards, identity theft. I have a twin sister. She was a victim of identity theft by a female illegal alien while she was in law school. It was so much time and such a hard effort to gain her identity back that the Social Security Administration actually issued her a new Social Security number, and that's very difficult to do. Many times, we're talking about marriage frauds, passport frauds. I conducted many search warrants where I found many documents, fraudulent documents, where these organizations, visas, and you name it. So yes, especially in the employment capacity, where these employers are denying knowledge, and they hide behind that when they say, well, the illegal did provide me with an actual Social Security number or an ID. It happens to belong to someone else or someone that doesn't exist altogether.
And do individuals who enter the country illegally and engage in identity theft or perhaps have forged Social Security cards and the like, do they typically comply with other laws, like federal tax laws and
No.
other laws? Or, in other words, my point is that, is there such a thing as a person who enters a country illegally who does not violate any other laws?
No, typically there's other violations of law that sometimes the Democrats refer to as civil infractions or civil administrative. And that's, I think there's a big confusion between the criminal violation of law versus the civil violation of immigration law. The Democrats seem to convolute it and make it into one, which is very, very different. And they commit a lot of different criminal and civil violations amongst after they come in, whether failure to have even drivers or vehicle insurance, things like that, right? That matter in my state of Texas, why our rates are so high, emergency room costs, many, many other economic impacts throughout the U.S.
Dr. Veliz, I certainly respect your public service. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, though, based on your testimony, I was wondering, do you believe all laws should be enforced or just some of the laws?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, in my 30 years experience as a police commander, working the streets, working in with federal task forces, I always focus on the most violent offenses, violent offenders. My team and I were involved in hundreds of felony criminal investigations ranging from drug trafficking, weapons, and shootings.
And we appreciate your service, as I started out by saying, but the question I have is, do you believe that all laws should be enforced or just some laws?
Either laws are passed by legislation, law enforcement has the discretion to enforce those laws. And I prioritize enforcing the most violent offenses, make sure communities are safe.
Don't they frequently, in your experience in law enforcement, call that selective prosecution? To just go after some cases, but not other cases of similarly situated persons who violate the same law?
Chairman Cornyn, I saw it as discretionary powers of sworn officers that I have. The discretion to select the most violent offenses and focus on the most violent offenders in the communities.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a vote on, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Senator Cruz here momentarily. I just want to thank all of you for being here today and offering your testimony. And again, to Ms. Nobles and Ms. Vega, if you have our condolences. And I think we've had a test case between what happens when you enforce our immigration laws, which we've seen under President Trump, and what happens when you don't enforce the immigration laws on a uniform basis under President Biden. But I thank all of you for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to Senator.
I yield Senator Cornyn. I think you're taking over.
Thank you all for being here, and my comments will not reflect on you or your organization at all, but I do think it's important for Congress and the American people to understand the nature of this threat. I'm not the only one who's been at a sporting or entertainment event recently that's seen the incredible use of drones operating sort of like an orchestra and doing things that sort of years ago perhaps we could only imagine. But the fact of the matter is that we are not prepared for this technology. The truth is, like every technology, it can be used for good or ill. But the fact is, and I think, Mr. Willoughby, you mentioned the Operation Spiderweb that the Ukrainians used against the Russian Federation in June of 2025, where they literally transported hundreds of drones and vehicles to evade air defense systems, but then release the drones on cue to attack and then bomb a fleet of Russian bombers, knocking out a significant percentage of their bombing fleet. I was reflecting on your testimony when I was also thinking about a little over a year ago, President Trump was was a target of an assassination attempt. The Secret Service, who's not represented here today, when we asked them about drones, apparently the shooter had a drone and used that for purposes of surveillance before he actually got in place and took the shot. And I asked about anti-drone technology for the Secret Service, and they said they had none. They're present. And their own drones were apparently not operational for some reason. It is true that the Iranian regime currently has a death warrant out for President Trump, and the FBI has interrupted and disrupted a number of assassination attempts against President Trump. Isn't that right, Mr. Torfey?
The FBI has thwarted many attack plots using drones and otherwise, and we believe that that is the FBI doing what the FBI does best, intelligence, investigations, undercover operations, and only when all else fails, we have the technical countermeasures to protect tactical events.
Well, the FBI does good work, but as you point out, with 90,000 special events around the country each year, you can't be everywhere, and you depend on state and local officials to help out. We saw that actually at Butler, Pennsylvania, a little over a year ago, but when the Secret Service delegated its responsibilities to protect the President of the United States, obviously that failed to accomplish that objective. But it strikes me, Mr. Willoughby, that given this incredible technology that the Ukrainians demonstrated just this summer against the Russians, that we are not prepared to deal with this threat to either at a mass sporting event or entertainment event, or even to protect the President of the United States if an adversary decided to use drone swarms to do him harm. Do you agree with me?
I do think it comes down to capacity, which is why, we continue to reiterate the need for additional entities that can operate this type of equipment and protect within their jurisdictions the events and the citizens that are there.
Yeah, it's not, I know Mr. Hardy and Mr. Trophy have talked about authorities, but of course those only are useful once something bad happens. An investigation occurs, a prosecution occurs. But when it comes to actually preventing harm to the American people, whether it's a sporting event, entertainment event, or even at a rally like the one at Butler, Pennsylvania, it strikes me that a determined adversary has all the tools they need using drone technology to accomplish their goal. And we're not prepared to deal with that at this point. You're right? Is that correct?
Yeah, again, I think the authority does afford us the opportunity to gain the needed air domain awareness, right? You can't stop a threat that you don't know is there, right? You don't know a drone is there unless you have the advanced detection equipment there alongside a trained operator to be able to differentiate a media drone from a bad drone or an adversarial drone. And so again, just to re-echo the sentiment that we can't be everywhere all the time, and there are ways for us to improve our own operations, to include the Secret Service and other components. But we need additional partners to be able to tackle this type of threat scenario. If Operation Spiderweb were to occur domestically here, we would need additional partners out there to be able to identify and then prevent those drones from carrying out their attack.
Well, Senator Moody, like I, was Attorney General of our states, large states, and we worked, of course, with not only federal partners, but also state and local partners. And when you talk about resource constraints, that defines really the way that state and local partners operate. So it's the federal government that has the resources, but again, I know this is not intended as a criticism of any of you or your organizations, but it just strikes me we are woefully unprepared, and I know the state and local authorities don't have the resources they need in order to deal with this potential threat either. So this is not just a question of having the proper authorities and prosecuting people who violate those laws that we may pass, but then operationally, how do we prevent the harm that this new technology is capable of inflicting?
I think we have a bipartisan consensus that Senator Moody is next. Or is it Senator Britt?
Well, thank you. I always love it when I get to.
Yes, call the roll.
But we clarify, without a discussion on the second degree amendment?
Don't call the roll yet.
Without discussion or debate
On the, you
on
just,
the motion?
Go ahead, sir.
I don't want to jump over the ranking member.
I'll defer.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
I'm reading that Cornyn second degree, and he said a lot of really important things about immigration that are worthy to be discussed. And I'm happy to vote on an immigration bill. I disagree with the death penalty. I will vote my conscience on this. But I want to draw everybody's attention to the first two lines of your second degree. They have nothing to do about immigration. They have nothing to do with the death penalty. I've never seen this before. His first two line is not to bring up this important issue that should be discussed, debated. Your first two lines are to strike my amendment in its entirety. So what we have right here is hidden behind real issues on immigration is really just trying to not vote on the important points that we brought up about transparency and accountability on the Jeffrey Epstein files. This is not an amendment to my amendment. This is an attempt to strike what I have a whole list of prominent Republicans, elected leaders, who want the same thing I want, which is just to have transparency on this matter.
Can we vote
I've
on
heard
my
some of the
second degree?
comments. If I can finish, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I have heard public statements by my Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I've heard comments from Republicans on the House side and Democrats on the House side that we want transparency and accountability on a matter of public safety. Senator Cornyn said that Jeffrey Epstein's dead yet, but his victims are not. There are women who have horrific stories of vile violence that was committed against them. We have Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, who said that there is evidence, truckloads of it, as to these crimes, potential co-conspirators, potential others involved. How can we not want to just know what happened? Why are we trying to simply turn away from the highest law enforcement officers in the land, from our FBI director to our attorney general, who spoke towards crimes committed and others involved in those crimes? Why are we considering an amendment that is hiding behind real immigration issues, but real intent is to strike a simple request for transparency, for accountability, that Republican voices all across the spectrum have been demanding from this president and this attorney general? So if Senator Cornyn is going to offer an amendment, I'm going to offer a third degree that simply strikes his first two lines. I'll vote on your immigration stuff that you so strongly stated there was the importance of this, but you hid the fact that you put here the real intention of your amendment. It has nothing to do with immigration. It says it right here in the first two lines. The real effort was just to not have accountability and transparency. What are you afraid of?
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Yeah, you may respond.
I trust the Senate-confirmed Attorney General of the United States to make the proper legal analysis to determine what of the Jeffrey Epstein files can be released. He was confirmed by the United States Senate as Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States. I trust her to make the right legal determination. But I would ask my colleague from New Jersey, you claim you care about the victims. Do you care about Tammy Nobles? Do you care about Marie Vega, the angel moms who lost their loved ones, their children, to the acts of an illegal alien who never should have been here in the first place? Do you care about them?
Can I respond to the senator's question? Sir, I've known you for 14 years. You and I both care about victims of crime. And to suggest otherwise is stunning to me.
Senator,
if I may finish, sir,
Senator,
I allowed you to finish.
I asked
sir,
you a question.
And I'm trying to
I didn't
answer.
make an accusation.
Mr. Chairman,
I asked you
Mr.
a
Chairman,
question.
Mr. Chairman.
Answer the question.
I should have allowed a time to respond to the senator's question. I did not interrupt him, and now he's interrupting me.
Please
It is another violation of the decorum of this place.
Go ahead, Senator Booker.
Senator Cornyn, both you and I have spent our lives. I know your record. I know your history. I know what you've done. I would never, ever question whether you care about the victims of a heinous crime. You ask me if I care? Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, I'm not finished yet.
Well, thank you for answering the question.
Well, I'm going to answer the question in full. You are not sincere.
Let me explain.
Sir, he has put an amendment in.
Would you allow
trying to use the horrific nature
Would you allow me as sponsor of this bill to
Sir,
explain?
I will not pick a fight with Chuck Grassley in the same way that Chuck Grassley won't pick a fight with me.
The reason for his amendment is because your amendment says that this bill that we're working on will not go into effect until we get all these records. And this bill is an opioid bill to help solve some of the drug problems in this country. And we ought to get it passed because it's a bipartisan bill and it's very badly needed.
Sir, may I respond?
Yes.
So I said at the top of my comments, my frustrations, we've said it to your staff, we've said it to others, that when funds like this have been made available so far in the first 6 months, they're clawing back funds from my state. And that's unfair, and I would like to deal with those. We could deal with them. And given that, I am sticking to an amendment that is not controversial. Okay. I know it's not controversial, sir, because I've seen polling literally on Republican channels that the overwhelming majority of Republicans and Democrats want transparency and accountability. That the overwhelming majority of Americans has seen that one of these two things is lies. Is there truckloads full of evidence as to victims of crime not having justice? Have we been lied to? Who are we trying to protect? What are they trying to hide? This is not controversial. We have Republican leaders in Congress calling for the same thing that this amendment calls for. And so for a second degree to be offered to mine, where you're using horrific crimes to hide the real intention of this, if this amendment is so important, just strike the first two lines that strikes my entire amendment. The intention of this is clear. It's to not give the American people accountability, transparency, and truth. That's what we as the Judiciary Committee should be seeking. So I offer a third degree amendment, preserving every noble thing that the senator from Texas said he wanted.
You can't offer a third degree amendment.
I can't offer a third degree. Then I ask that we strike the true intention of his amendment, the first two lines.
At this stage, you can't offer a third degree amendment. If there's some way for you to do that, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, may I respond?
Yes.
Briefly.
Then we'll have a roll call vote because I know you folks want to get votes on your amendment. I asked you to withdraw them and you aren't withdrawing them. So
well, I just want to ask a question, Mr. Chairman. In your opinion, would the addition of these amendments to the underlying bipartisan bill jeopardize our ability to pass this underlying bill, anti-opioid bill, out of committee and across the Senate floor and get it enacted into law? Would these amendments jeopardize that?
I see them jeopardized in ways even beyond what you said.
So,
because if we pass the legislation with this stuff on, it wouldn't go into effect anyway. Who knows how far down the road? When the president signs the bill, I want it to be effective.
That's what I thought, and I appreciate your answering the question. I think the debate that Senator Booker and I have is not something that's going to be resolved today. And so it will continue. So I think regardless of how we act on the underlying bill, that debate will continue, and neither he nor I are giving anything up in terms of our ability to continue to debate this topic. But I'm willing to withdraw my amendment if Senator Booker's willing to withdraw his amendment in the interest of passing this bipartisan anti-opioid bill out of the committee and through the Senate and seeing it enacted into law and hopefully saving some lives in the process.
Senator Booker.
Mr. Grassley, sir, I have asked for someone to address my New Jersey concerns for months now. There was an incident in which you got a special carve-out for your state when they froze funds, but I have got no justice for New Jersey. So if you want to postpone this and address my New Jersey concerns about the resources we are not getting, and I know you would do that with me in good faith, I would be happy in our next meeting, but right now I am sticking with my amendment.
It'd be faster to address your concerns for New Jersey if you'd asked me to help you with the administration to get something done so you can get your money.
Sir, I've got no, not from you.
Then if you do it through the legislative process, tell me that. Let me make a conversation with the White House on your issue.
But I'm going to stick with my amendment until I get satisfaction on that.
The clerk will call the roll.
And what are we voting on? I have no idea. On my amendment?
No, we're voting.
It's the second degree.
Call the roll on the Cornyn amendment.
Mr. Grant.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz. Aye. Mr. Hawley. Mr.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. So his second degree, which had nothing to do with immigration, which was to conceal the Epstein file, Senator Cornyn's effort to conceal the Epstein files right here on 1 and 2 has now violated my amendment. There is no amendment anymore. It passed.
That's right.
And Cornyn is saying, yes, I did something to stop the American public from seeing the Epstein files. It renders my amendment moot. That was the intention of Senator Cornyn's amendment that he just passed, which was to conceal
Chairman, I have to respond. Nothing we are voting on today is going to change any of the debate about the Epstein files. That debate will continue.
That is not
and
true.
If you don't acknowledge that, I just have to, I really question whether your amendment is actually in good faith or not, because nothing's going to change that. But, Mr. Chairman, my second degree amendment passed, which included striking the Senator Booker's amendment. I believe we've, committee's spoken.
May I respond? He directly referenced me. May I respond? Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So Mr. Cornyn claims that nothing about this would end debate. We're not seeking to end debate. We're seeking to pass legislation out of this committee that would force the disclosure and the transparency and the truth being made public. We had a chance today that Senator Cornyn blocked to make the truth known to the American public. We had the power today, the possibility today, to force out the truth regarding the Epstein files and the lies and the obfuscation that is happening by this administration. What Senator Cornyn did today was to block the truth about what's happening with the Department of Justice and the Epstein file. It is that on its plain truth, no matter how much he wants to try to dodge that truth.
Mr. Chairman, I have to respond.
Well, quickly, because
I will respond quickly.
Take your time.
What Senator Booker is trying to do is to kill this underlying bipartisan bill that will hopefully save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives because of the opioid crisis. It's already taken tens of thousands of lives in this country over recent years because of the Biden open border policies. So I'm simply trying to preserve this bipartisan legislation, again, that will save lives. The debate that he and I are having over the Epstein files, I doubt will be resolved today based on any amendments either he or I offer. So That's the reason for my amendment, because I want to save lives from the opioid crisis. And I believe his amendment is a distraction from that and actually will jeopardize seeing this bipartisan legislation enacted into law.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
No, I'm calling on Grant.
I thought you were going back and forth, sir. I didn't know that.
I'll be real quick. So if Senator Booker's problem is with the bill itself, which it seems to be, I understand that. Hopefully we can work out a way to get money to your state you think does justice for New Jersey. I got that. That makes perfect sense. But the Epstein Amendment, present it some other way, it's not going away. What we're trying to do with this bill is really good. And there's no end to this, a way of doing business here. If this is a headline about Cornyn blocks transparency of Epstein, then that would be sad, because he's responding to your amendment that would make the bill, quite frankly, fail. I want to help Senator Booker with your problem, but what you're doing, I don't think is helpful to the bill. I don't think it's helpful to the committee. I don't think it's helpful to your problem.
Senator Graham, there's not been a time in my career where you said you want to help me that you didn't. So I'm going to take you up on that, and I'm going to withdraw I'm going to withdraw my amendment.
You're a good man, and I will try to deliver with Senator Grassley the best I can.
Mr. Chairman, I would also, I would also ask leave to withdraw my amendment and vote on the underlying bill.
Those in favor of 1098, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The 1098 is reported. Now, the last bill that we have on the agenda is the Child Act. I co-lead this bill with Senator Durbin. The bill ensures that all individuals with unsupervised access to children is authorized to receive nationwide background checks. I'd like to recognize the bill's lead sponsor, Senator Durbin. I think you already spoke on it, didn't you? Yeah. Those in favor of 1528, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say
So, Chief, the with 500,000 unaccompanied children during the Biden administration, 4 years, we know those numbers have dropped precipitously since that time in terms of the number of unaccompanied minors coming into the country. I think the total for 2025 is roughly 28,000. So that's 500,000, 28,000 now. So it's dropped dramatically. What would you attribute that drop in the number of unaccompanied children showing up at the border to?
Well, most importantly, it's the enforcement action at the border. It's the consequences for anybody that crosses the border, and exactly what some of the concerns are that have been spoke about today is that we are going after the sponsors. We are making sure that we are putting the child's best interest first. So when length of the care goes up from 60 days to 6 months, that's a good thing, because we're making sure we're not putting them back into a potential criminal environment. And yes, if somebody in that family is undocumented, they should be arrested and detained, and the family can stay together. So when you see that drop, that's because enforcement is taking place that had been virtually not used, or should I rephrase that it wasn't done at the level that it could have been done over the previous, administrations.
So, Ms. Giovanni, do you agree with Chief Clem that if in fact a member of the household where these children are placed with a sponsor, if they in fact are illegally present in the United States, that they should be deported?
I think it depends on the situation, but they shouldn't be. You know what? Let me say it a different way.
Well, I'd like you to answer my question.
Oh, well, I'm trying to. I'm just trying to think about the best way to do it. The mere fact that someone is here unlawfully without authorization doesn't necessarily mean that they should be deported.
It's a crime.
Is it?
Yes.
I don't think so. It's a civil matter.
No, it's a crime.
It's a civil matter.
So you don't think that people illegally present should be deported?
It depends on the situation.
Okay. Well, is that why you, while you worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, and that you did not seek to vet the other members of the household where these children were placed?
Well, Senator, first of all, many of the allegations about improper vetting and things like that actually occurred before I got to HHS. Secondly, my job.
I'm talking about on your watch. Did you see children placed with sponsors in households where the other members of the household were unvetted?
Sir, my job was to receive reports from all stakeholders and investigate those reports. I did not get reports of that kind. So I don't have an answer for you because I wasn't involved in that part of the process.
Well, don't you think it would be a good idea to vet the other members of the household to see if maybe, let's say, one of them is not a sex offender?
I think that the vetting standards that are in place now, and those standards have increased significantly, allow ORR to do that in many situations, but also the important thing is that if you have enough information that you can determine that the child is going to be placed safely, you continue to check on that child. And under the Biden administration, the post-release services went from only 20% of children to 100% of children in terms of having other follow-ups and other points of contact.
Well,
you also have attorneys to make sure that the children are safe.
Well, I thought the New York Times, when they went through an investigation, they tried to follow up on these unaccompanied children placed with sponsors, and I believe the number is 85,000 cases, and there was no answer. Does that concern you?
If that was the only piece of information that identified whether or not a child was missing or not, maybe, but that's not the case. Calling a family and them not answering doesn't mean anything if they have eventually caught back up with the family in another way.
It means it means you don't know about the welfare of that child.
No, it doesn't. Not at all. It's one data point in a much more elaborate set of contacts.
You call the house to check on the welfare of the child, and nobody answers, and that's not a concern of yours.
Let's say you call the house to check on the child and nobody answers. If you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, as they would in the child welfare system, the first call, which is all that we're talking about, is not the only way that they are in contact with.
So you think losing
I don't think they're lost.
Is okay. You don't?
I don't think they're lost. No, Senator.
How do you know? How do you know what's happened to them? Nobody's answering the phone. Let me turn to you, Chief Clem, and Ms. Hopper. Do you think it's a problem to place these children with sponsors in a home where you don't know who else is living in the household? Ms. Hopper?
It absolutely is. And when Ms. Giovanni mentioned the phone calls, there were 2 phone calls. And when Senator Moody mentioned that state agencies were trying to do welfare checks on the children sent to Florida, DCF Director Siobhan Harris came here, sat at this table last year in a Senate roundtable and said that state agencies were being stonewalled from receiving the information of these sponsors and where they were sent. So state agencies could not conduct welfare checks. Why would federal agencies stonewall state agencies from conducting welfare checks to ensure the welfare and the well-being of a child in their state?
Chief Clem, do you agree with Ms. Hopper?
I agree. You know, putting my law enforcement hat on, that is always my concern, knowing what is happening at the border, the fact that there is so much trafficking and transnational criminal organizations have their hands in everything to put the well-being of this child as a priority. We have to follow up. We have to know who is in that household. We need to know the background checks of all those. So yes, the first call needs to be followed up with a knock on the door, and if necessary, a kick in the door to find out if these kids are there and if they're taken care of.
Well, my friend and colleague, Senator Padilla, mentioned root causes. So the Border Patrol, I've learned everything I know about the border from the Border Patrol in my state and elsewhere. And what they've told me is that there are things called push factors and pull factors. In other words, the push factors are things you would expect: poverty, violence, maybe a desire for a better life, something we can all identify with. But the pull factor is what is the reward being given to somebody who comes to the country outside of legal channels. And do you believe the pull factors during the last 4 years, during the preceding administration, were a significant influence on the number and the volume of unaccompanied children that made their way to the border? And as we know, there were 500,000 of them.
Yes, that's exactly my experience from day one in the Border Patrol to the time I retired. When we have policies that incentivize a catch and release, or a quick, release into the country, that is a pull factor. It's what I mentioned earlier, that the transnational criminal organizations are watching and listening to everything we say. So they're changing their business model on what we're doing here. So when we stand strong and enforce the law and hold people accountable and give consequences, we see that reduction at the border, and the numbers show that. When we don't, when we overcrowd facilities, when we catch and release, when we do not do what's best in the child's interest, at least outwardly facing, that incentivizes, that becomes a pull factor. And we've seen that play time and time again throughout my career.
So if you're truly concerned about the welfare of these children, it strikes me as one of the most important things you can do is enforce the law, secure the border, and discourage people from coming in the first place. I agree, and that's what we're doing right now, as I mentioned in my opening statement, how we have special agents responding to the field where these encounters are happening to make sure that we can mitigate any criminal activity right then and there, so we can start right off the bat that we're reducing the likelihood of this child being trafficked and placed in the harm's way when they're ultimately released from ORR, or if we are able to repatriate them back to their country. That's what law enforcement does. Thank you. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple follow-up questions for me.
We'll start with 5-minute rounds, and I will begin. Chief Clem, what is the main driving force for this smuggling of minor children from their homes in Central or South America or Mexico into the United States? What is it? What's the incentive that's driving that?
Well, first of all, it's profit. You know, the cartels and these smuggling organizations are commodity neutral, whether it's people, kids, or product. It's about overall money, but also, you know, some of the existing loopholes that in our system that we've all mentioned today, that, you know, they can get these kids here in the United States and continue to do that, to make profit. And again, it's the loopholes in the laws.
So in your experience, after 27 and a half years, I think, is in government service, your view is that that these criminal organizations, that frequently called transnational criminal organizations, have simply become expert at how to exploit the U.S. laws or U.S. law enforcement.
100%. I mean, they are excellent at information and intelligence gathering on what we're doing here in the United States, from monitoring operations to monitoring what we're doing here on a House floor or a Senate floor. They're listening to what we're doing, and they're going to adjust their business model based on what U.S. policies are.
And we've heard some concerns expressed, which I share, about the treatment of any minor child while in U.S. custody. Not a lot of discussion about the incentives that drive parents or family members to turn their kids over to cartels to transmit them to the border. But in your experience, are many of the children that are turned over to the coyotes or the smugglers abused along the way?
I think just the general process that goes on to be smuggled through Mexico into our U.S. border is horrific because of the stash houses, the unrelated adults, the things that are going on. Are many of them then abused? Yes. Not all of them, but we have seen plenty of them that are, pretty traumatized. They don't say much to us when they're in our custody, but we do have avenues to get them the support they need while they're in our custody. At the end of the day, when the volumes are so high, we don't always see that while they're with Border Patrol, and it comes out later when they're placed in OR.
Well, speaking of the volumes, if the policy of the Biden administration was essentially to waive anybody who shows up at the border in, particularly those who utter the magic words that they're coached to say in order to qualify for a preliminary screening for asylum, that overwhelmed the capacity of the Border Patrol to deal with them, did it not? We saw crowded detention facilities. We saw Border Patrol, rather than protecting the border, feeding children, changing diapers, transporting them. Did it overwhelm our capacity to deal with it, but the policies of the previous administration?
Well, I was firsthand on the ground there, in Yuma especially, where we would sometimes hold 5,000 to 6,000 people in the parking lot in the soft-sided facilities that were constructed to maintain this flow. There were times where in my 126 miles of border, we had 4 agents out there because we were too busy processing. Now, I will say, for the record, Yuma did not have a large unaccompanied alien child crossing. My neighbors in Tucson did. My neighbors in San Diego did. We just had people from 116 different countries overwhelming all of our resources. So we could not put the effort, the law enforcement, the criminal investigation piece on any of the trafficking and smuggling operations that were going on because we were outnumbered sometimes 10 to 1, 50 to 1 on illegal aliens and Border Patrol agents.
So, Ms. Hopper, I have in my hand an article from the Atlantic Journal-Constitution entitled, "For Migrant Girls, New Lives in the U.S. Brings a Risk of Sexual Abuse." And we are, without objection, going to make that part of the record. Is that the future that many of these young girls face coming into the United States and being placed with unvetted sponsors?
It is, unfortunately, and when it doesn't include the sexual exploitation that they encounter along the journey, only to be further sexually exploited once they come into the country, that article clearly outlines that, yeah.
And do we know whether those young girls who are traumatized by that, whether they receive the mental and physical health care that they may need in the United States, or is that something we just don't know the answer to?
We are unclear of the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Senator Padilla. I'd like to ask, maybe starting with Mr. Singleton and go down the row here. A few years ago when I visited Australia with Senator Warner, who was chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and Angus King, and also another member of the Intelligence Committee, I was struck by the fact that talking to Australian parliamentarians, that the assumption that I had made that Australia would join in any collective defense of Taiwan that the United States was involved in just as a matter of course. But because of the politics in their own country, the diaspora of Chinese in Australia, it caused me to question who might join us in that effort. Mr. Singleton, who can we rely on besides ourselves?
It's a great question, and I think what the PRC is doing is actively exploiting all the cleavages amongst the democracies to sow doubt on this question. I personally believe that in the event of a Taiwan contingency, Canberra would step up, but it will largely depend on the political calculus in Canberra at the time, the makeup of its government, and of course, the Chinese get a vote and the leverage that they can employ over the Australians and all of our partners, frankly. I would put the most bang for my buck on the Japanese. I think we've seen real shifts in strategy, rhetoric, and resource allocation in Japan. The election of a new, very hawkish Japanese prime minister is an excellent sign. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I suspect this will come down to U.S. power and U.S. pressure in the region.
Mr. Powell, do you have a different view, Dr. Ratner?
To 2020. I used to, when I would brief our incoming delegations, I would often remind them that Australia is, despite all of our experience on the military side, is not the 51st state and does not necessarily sign up to everything that we decide to do, even though they have been extraordinarily consistent in supporting U.S. operations throughout the decades. I think that one of the things we often forget is that when we are engaged in our own internal public discourse, that the world watches and that they are also, in many cases, democracies. And so it's very important that we sort of calibrate our rhetoric so that we bring them in rather than sort of find reasons to sort of cleave them off. So it's very important, I think, that we sometimes, when we're talking out loud, remember that the Australian people are listening.
Dr. Ratner, let me withhold that answer from you because that time is limited, and I want to get back to all of you on another important topic. A few years ago, as a result of COVID, we realized how dependent we are on extended supply chains of critical technology. For example, advanced semiconductors. And it occurred to me, and not just me alone, but many of us, that another pandemic, another war, another natural disaster would be disastrous to the United States in terms of our access to advanced semiconductors that we need for virtually everything, including our weapons. So I wanted to ask about our dependency on China for processing of critical minerals. 90% of the world's critical minerals are processed in China. They use that as enormous leverage. And while we did plus up the Office of Strategic Capital and the Development Finance Corporation and the Working Families Tax Cut Act, otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, how should we use that leverage those authorities and that funding to counter PRC's dominance when it comes to critical mineral processing? We'll start with you, Mr. Singleton.
Sure, I would just add that the late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping said that the Middle East has oil, but China has rare earths, and they've shown a willingness to weaponize it in the last year. I think this gets back to your last question. Where are our partners? The Australians are a natural partner here. They're a mining superpower. The Japanese have capital, and they have connections in countries like Malaysia, where President Trump is getting ready to go in a few weeks. We should be signing deals in this space aggressively, thinking about capital pooling, but also offload agreements. And I think it just represents a tremendous opportunity for enhancing alliance cohesion in the region.
Let me ask Dr. Ratner, do you have a view?
I would agree with Mr. Singleton and just say that, look, we need to build secure supply chains with our allies and partners, not closing ourselves off from the rest of the world.
My time's up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Member Coons. I'm inclined to defer to Senator Duckworth if she's prepared to question, because we're going to do a number of rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Coons. On my frequent travel...
Soon, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. At our last meeting last week, two of my Republican colleagues defended President Trump's unlawful attempt to deploy the Texas National Guard to my home state of Illinois. I want to take a moment to respond. One colleague compared Trump's actions to President Eisenhower deploying the 101st Airborne Division to desegregate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. Most of my colleagues here are too young to remember the Civil Rights Movement, but there is no comparison between Arkansas's massive resistance to desegregation and Illinois' peaceful and lawful opposition to this administration's immigration policy. Arkansas Governor Orville Forbes called up the Arkansas National Guard to block black students from entering Little Rock Central High School in defiance of the Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. The 101st Airborne, dispatched by President Eisenhower, was deployed to ensure these students, the Little Rock Nine, as they were known, could safely attend school. They weren't tear gassing pastors, journalists, and police officers, as the federal agents are now doing in Broadview, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. They didn't rappel from Black Hawk helicopters in the middle of the night to swarm an apartment building, breaking down doors, rousting families out of bed, zip tying and detaining U.S. citizens, including children, as federal agents did in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood 2 weeks ago. That is a fact. And then the senior senator from Texas compared my opposition to Texas National Guard being deployed to Illinois, to southern states defending the institution of slavery. He said, and I quote, attempting to resurrect a long rejected idea associated with slavery in the early days of the United States, that the state and local officials can nullify federal law. The senior senator from Texas is a good lawyer, and he's well aware of how limited that comparison is. I'm not arguing that states can override federal law. I'm arguing that President Trump is violating federal law. Don't take my word for it. Judge Karen Immergut, a conservative Republican appointed to the federal bench by President Trump, blocked the deployment of the National Guard in Portland, Oregon. Listen to what she said, and I quote, and let me remind you again, a Trump appointee, quote, this country has longstanding and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. That's what the judge said. Or listen to Republican Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, another conservative. And he said, quote, Oklahomans would lose their mind if Pritzker, Governor Pritzker, in Illinois sent troops down to Oklahoma during the Biden administration. I'm sure they would have. And I'm sure at a guarded moment and by secret ballot, every member of this committee would agree. Here's the reality. The president's actions are about politics, not public safety. For the past 2 decades, the murder rate in red states has exceeded the murder rate in blue states. But the president is focused on Chicago, where violent crime is down dramatically. We should build on that success and work together, not undermine it. As I told the Attorney General, it is my job to ask fundamental questions about whether the federal government is following the law and Constitution. But she refused to tell me when I asked what was the legal basis for deploying the National Guard in Illinois. Instead, she launched irrelevant and false personal attacks. In more than 2 decades on this committee, I've never encountered a witness from any administration, Democrat or Republican, respond to legitimate oversight questions with personal attacks on the senators on this committee. That testimony by the Attorney General demonstrated the disdain she has for this committee and the constitutional responsibility we share to conduct oversight, regardless of the party in charge in the White House or Congress. We also need to hear from Department of Homeland Security Secretary Noem. She made time to go to Chicago for a glossy promo video, but she refuses to meet with me and Senator Duckworth. She won't respond to our oversight request and denies us access to detention facilities in the state we represent. We were there last Friday. There were demonstrators there. In the course of the day, 4 were arrested and detained. It was a quiet day. People were exercising their constitutional rights in a nonviolent fashion, as they should. When I was chair of this committee, I held a DHS oversight hearing with Secretary Mayorkas during the first year of the Biden administration. He faced tough questions from both sides of the aisle. You probably remember it. Unlike the current Attorney General, he didn't insult this committee with his responses. Mr. Chairman, we sent you a letter in June asking when Secretary Noem would appear before the committee. I hope, again, for the record, you'll make it clear that that's going to happen soon.
Senator Durbin, would you yield for a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
We don't
You
have
said
a
that you said
schedule
the
yet,
president
but
violated federal law, and what federal law did he violate by sending National Guard troops to Chicago?
Well, the question is, what federal law did he follow to send those troops, and he couldn't produce it in the court in Oregon?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
It's been contested as to whether he has the authority to send in the National Guard. In the court in Oregon, I just quoted the judge. There is no basis for his doing so.
You didn't say what federal law what law he violated. Is it illegal for him to send federal officials there to enforce
There are legal
federal law?
there are legal authorities for him to do it, and he hasn't been able to establish in court successfully that he's followed them.
Well, I wish if you're
fact,
going to
he
accuse
keeps
the
threat-
president of violating federal law, that you could actually tell us what law you
Well,
think he
I
violated.
asked the senator from Texas, why does he keep bringing up the Insurrection Act?
Well, he hasn't asserted any right under the Insurrection
For
Act.
good reason. There is
But
no
this
basis.
is, to answer your point about the border, in the absence of federal law enforcement along the border, or actually when the open border policies of the Biden administration were in place, Border Patrol was overwhelmed, so Governor Abbott sent National Guard and Department of Public Safety to the border to back up the border
Of his own
patrol,
state?
not to enforce the law,
State,
but to
Texas?
supplement their efforts so they would free them up so they could deal with the challenges that they had as a result of being overwhelmed.
Were these border areas in your state of Texas?
Say that again?
The border areas that the governor sent the National Guard to, were they in Texas?
Yeah.
Well, that's a totally different story than we're facing in Illinois.
Okay.
Well, since I was referenced, I just would like to respond.
You want to speak to this issue, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, briefly. Well, specifically, the president has cited Title 32 authority to send the National Guard there. I can understand the sensitivity from my Democrat friend, because Democrats were on the wrong side of these issues. The Democrat governors opposed Reconstruction. The Democrat governors opposed desegregation, which I cited last week in Arkansas. And now they're on the wrong side of law, opposing the protection of American citizens and law enforcement who are doing their jobs, which is to enforce federal immigration law. The president has every authority to send the National Guard to protect those ICE agents and protect federal facilities. The fact that J.B. Pritzker wants to be known as sort of the resistance right now is not an excuse to say that the president's violating federal law. He's cited federal law. He's cited Title 32 in doing his job in protecting the American people. So,
I was going, first of all, I want to respond to my ranking member that we're trying to get a meeting with Secretary Noem.
Sooner the better, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Whitehouse, if you're going to speak 5 or 10 minutes, I'd like to call the roll, and then I'll call on you, but if you...
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah, what I want to do is just to make a record regarding the substance, the procedural substance of some of the questions that I asked Attorney General Bondi that she just flat out refused to answer. So if you want to proceed with the votes, that's fine with me, as long as I'm recognized at the conclusion of the votes.
Thank you for your cooperation.
I carried out a number of high-profile terror attacks against the United States, including the 1983 suicide truck bombings of the U.S. Embassy and U.S. Marine Barracks in Beirut, the 1984 car bombing of the U.S. Embassy Annex in Beirut, and the 1985 hijacking of TWA Flight 847. Hezbollah forms part of Iran's network of proxies across the Middle East, along with other terrorist organizations like the Houthis and Hamas. In 2020, the U.S. State Department estimated that Iran provided as much as $700 million in funds to Hezbollah annually, and was one of Hezbollah's main suppliers of military technology. Hezbollah's threat to the United States and Israel is not geographically confined to the Middle East. In 1992, at Iran's direction, Hezbollah bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 29 people and wounding 242. And in 1994, Iran ordered Hezbollah to carry out the bombing of the Argentine Israelite Mutual Association Jewish Society Community Center, killing another 85 people and wounding more than 300. The American Jewish Committee has described the attack as the deadliest anti-Semitic attack outside of Israel since the Holocaust. Last year, we observed the 30th anniversary of that bombing, and although we have not suffered another successful Hezbollah-perpetrated terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere since 1994, Hezbollah has been far from inactive. Its activities in Latin America are chiefly focused on raising funds for its terrorist operations in the Middle East and elsewhere. Beginning in the mid-'80s, Hezbollah established a presence in the lawless tri-border region of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, infiltrating the largest Lebanese Shiite diaspora community. As the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, noted last year, Hezbollah's illicit activities in the tri-border region have included oil smuggling, money laundering, black market money exchange, counterfeiting, and illegal weapons procurement. FinCEN also reported that Hezbollah has developed close ties to the South American drug trafficking organizations, laundering their proceeds for them. Hezbollah has found a home in Venezuela as well, where the Chavez and the Maduro regimes have developed close ties with Iran and Hezbollah. I'm concerned about reports that indicate that the former Venezuelan vice president was responsible for issuing Venezuelan passports to Hezbollah members, facilitated their coming to Latin America through Venezuela, and helped Hezbollah to channel funds to the Middle East. In 2020, the Department of Justice charged a former member of the Venezuelan National Assembly and Maduro ally with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons offenses. Among other things, the Department of Justice has alleged that El Zabayar acted as a liaison between the Maduro-linked Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, and Hezbollah and Hamas. Hezbollah has also been active in Venezuela's southern neighbor of Colombia. The U.S. Treasury Department has linked Lebanese-Colombian drug kingpin Ayman Jomah, his network, to Hezbollah as well. In 2012, the department designated several members of Jomah's network, including Ali Mohammed Salah, under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. Salah was a former Hezbollah fighter who led a Hezbollah support cell in Colombia, solicited donations for Hezbollah from local business owners and residents, and acted as a liaison to Hezbollah's Foreign Relations Department and its operations in Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. More recently, the Department of the Treasury sanctioned Mahdi Akil Helbawa, who established a Colombian-based charcoal company used to launder funds for Hezbollah. While Hezbollah has been a significant terrorist threat to the United States, they have faced significant setbacks in the past year. In 2024, Israel eliminated much of Hezbollah's senior leadership. Hezbollah lost an important ally following the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria in December of 2024. And most importantly, Israel's success in the 12-day war with Iran and President Trump's brave decision to strike Iranian nuclear sites in Operation Midnight Hammer could dry up a key source of funding for Hezbollah. Analysts estimate that before the 12-day war, Iran provided between 70 and 90% of Hezbollah's annual budget. These setbacks may force the Iranian regime to look inward, and Hezbollah may be motivated to look elsewhere for funds to carry out its terrorist attacks. In this critical time, Hezbollah may seek to further expand its Latin America drug trafficking and money laundering networks, and that's why we are holding this hearing today. Today's hearing will help us to evaluate the current threat posed by Hezbollah to our south, to review the measures the U.S. government has taken to counter that threat over the last 10 years, and to consider how best to respond to the new environment. We're fortunate today to have a group of highly qualified witnesses, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Before I introduce the witnesses, I'll turn it over to Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn.
We'll reconvene the hearing, and let me thank the witnesses in the audience for your patience. We get paid to vote, so we better go vote when the opportunity presents itself. But I want to thank all of the panel for your opening statements, and I know there are a lot of questions. I'd like to start with the observation raised, I think in the Ambassador Sales, you may have mentioned the RAND study, one of the witnesses did, that was done in spring of 2025. And this statement is in that study. It says, Hezbollah collaborates extensively with government officials in Venezuela on intelligence, infrastructure, securing arms, identification documents, bank accounts, and pipelines for moving operatives and equipment. It goes on to say that in 2022, Iran and Venezuela formalized a 20-year cooperation agreement in which Maduro explicitly aligned his country with Iran's axis of resistance. And it refers to Iran's strategic partnership with Venezuela. I think for many Americans, including me and other members of Congress, we always believed or knew that there were terrorist operatives in South America because of the well-known terrorist attacks that we've talked about here, but perhaps didn't know that Hezbollah was so intertwined with the government of President Maduro as it was previously with President Chavez of Venezuela. And I wonder if maybe starting with Mr. Levitt, you could comment on that. And I guess as I think about Hezbollah, I think they're not just a terrorist organization, but they also basically run the government in Lebanon. And I wonder, do they have similar aspirations in countries like Venezuela?
Thank you for your question. First, I think it's important to note that while Hezbollah had tremendous sway, they didn't run the government, but they had tremendous sway over the government, a blocking third in the parliament, ministers, et cetera. In Lebanon, today they're under much more pressure because there's a new government there that is trying to implement the ceasefire. They're not looking to run the government in Venezuela and have the burden of governance, but they're looking to have as much influence as possible. They're looking to have people who are in a position, as Marshall and others said, to be able to provide them whatever passports they want. If they want to be able to engage in a money laundering scheme together with Hezbollah and Venezuela and Iran trading gold, which they do, they want to be able to have people who can facilitate that. If they want to be able to travel throughout the region and travel through Venezuela, they want to be able to do that. I think that it's not an exaggeration to include Venezuela today in what some people refer to as the axis of evasion, sanctions evasion, which is clearly Russia, China, and Iran and North Korea. But Venezuela now plays a very important role in that too. And so I wouldn't quite put Venezuela in the axis of resistance, but it's right next door, and it's a very important ally. And the fact that it is an important ally in the Western Hemisphere is something that has to give us pause, because it's not just a question of illicit financial activity, it's also a question of operational activity. And it's a question of undermining policies not only here in the Western Hemisphere, but elsewhere. If Venezuela enables or plays a role enabling Iran to move illicit funds, to access gold, to sell oil, to barter oil, then that's undermining our overall sanctions policy and a whole set of other issues. So Venezuela plays an important part in this illicit network as it reaches the Western Hemisphere.
Mr. Clifford, I think maybe Mr. Billingsley was the one who mentioned the cartel of the Suns. And I'm familiar with the Mexican cartels, but frankly not as familiar with Cartel of the Suns. And I wonder, Mr. Clifford and then Mr. Billingsley, could you talk a little bit about Maduro's role as head of the Cartel of the Suns and what sort of illicit businesses they're involved in?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator, and I'll join with you, sir. Just as an overview, the cartel, they say the Cartel of the Sun because within the Venezuelan military insignia, where our generals have stars, they have suns. And that is, that is why they call this the Cartel of the Sun, is because there is a belief that the most senior military leadership of Venezuela is involved in narcotics trafficking, allowing military transport aircraft infrastructure to facilitate narcotics trafficking from South America to Africa to Europe.
Mr. Billingsley?
Senator, that's exactly right. The Cartel de los Soles is a reference to the entire kleptocratic structure that surrounds Maduro and the rest of the senior leadership in the country, who have collaborated together now for many years to divvy up the spoils of the country. And it goes from a wide range of drug trafficking initiatives, but it goes all the way through to the looting of illicit gold mining in the country, the destruction of the rainforests, the oppression of the indigenous peoples as they do that, the contamination, mercury contamination you can see from space as they process the gold. They divvy up the oil proceeds. So it's the rampant looting of the entire country, but the main revenue generator for the regime is the narcotics trade, which is why so many of them have been indicted here in the United States on drug charges.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse? Thank you. So we'll do another round of questions. So this is a complex area of law enforcement, terrorism, money laundering, illegal drugs, and a whole lot of other things that you all have talked about here. But if you happen to be sitting at home and listening to this, I think the question most people would ask, whether they say it out loud or ask themselves, is so what? So what? So can you all each take a stab at answering that question? In other words, why is this, should this be important to the American people? Dr. Levitt?
I really appreciate the question. Look, it's not just that we have a serious drug problem in this country, and as the senator said, every state in the union has horrific numbers, but this is also a terrorist group that is working with Iran. It's working with regimes like Venezuela to do things that undermine the economy and that enable a terrorist group, to potentially carry out attacks. We're not talking
in the
about
United States?
Certainly in the Western Hemisphere. We've had several arrests and convictions of Hezbollah operatives in this country who were carrying out pre-operational surveillance of FBI offices and other federal buildings, and of individuals in New York and in Michigan and JFK International Airport and Pierce International Airport in Toronto, surveillance of the U.S. and Israeli embassies in Panama, plots in Chile, in Brazil, Colombia. And Colombia was also doing surveillance of the U.S. Embassy. This is a combination of the worst. Terrorist groups, rogue regimes, and narcotics traffickers. It ticks every box that should have our interest, and that if we can do things, and we can do things, including the bills that you've put forward, to make it more difficult for them to be able to do whatever they want in free trade zones, to make it more difficult for people to be able to hide the beneficial ownership, then this will make a difference in the lives of your constituents. This is not some esoteric concept.
Ambassador Sales, so what?
So what? This matters because Americans are at risk of terrorism, and Americans are at risk of the consequences of the narcotics trade. In addition to what Matt said about Hezbollah casing targets in the United States and across the world, I also want to point out that U.S. law enforcement and our partners around the world have detected a number of Hezbollah weapons caches located in cities around the world. It's typically ammonium nitrate stored in large amounts that they get from cold packs and first aid kits. Enormously volatile chemicals that could be used to produce explosives that are quite deadly. That's not an abstract threat. That's happening now. That's happening around the world as we speak. And the narcotics trade affects us all. How many of us know a friend or a family member who've suffered from losses resulting from the drug trade. Senator Whitehouse, you mentioned the numbers from 2023, the overdose numbers in 2023. In 2024, they're a bit lower, but any number above zero is catastrophic. 80,000 deaths in 2024. Of those, more than 48,000 from fentanyl, 22,000 from cocaine. Those numbers are unacceptable to the American people, and Hezbollah has a part in those numbers being where they are.
Senator, if I could just mention that those ICE pack cases, one of them was in Houston, Texas. Yeah, Senator, so what? So Hezbollah has killed lots of Americans over many decades. You mentioned a few of the attacks, the Marine Corps barracks bombings being a good example. So what? Hezbollah is the most effective operational arm of the Iranian regime, which is a regime that continues to pursue the destruction of the state of Israel and which continues to harbor nuclear weapons ambitions. So what? One of the guys that Dr. Levitt mentioned, who was arrested surveilling attack sites in New York, was also surveilling a way to shut down the Panama Canal. You want to hurt the Americans in the pocketbook? Let Hezbollah take down the canal. Final so what? Hezbollah has been training the Houthis on how to use drones and ballistic missiles to attack U.S. vessels and to shut down shipping in the Red Sea, which is spiking prices. So those are just a few examples, not to mention the so what of Hezbollah now being deeply embedded in Venezuela, helping drive, that swamp, which is attracting more and more snakes by the day.
And Mr. Clifford, before you answer that so what question, do you believe that Hezbollah operatives have made their way from South America across the southern border and are currently located in the United States?
I don't have any empirical information at this time to say that, sir.
What do you believe?
Knowing how Hezbollah operates, it's kind of a two-factor. Oftentimes, Hezbollah will engage in activity to stay away from law enforcement. So they will, for cases I've had, Hezbollah has engaged in marriage fraud, identification fraud, to come here legally so they don't get jammed up by the police. However, with the ability of Hezbollah to improvise, adapt, and overcome, it would not surprise me that Hezbollah operatives have entered the United States in any number of manners, to include crossing southwest border, sir.
And would you care to add anything to the earlier witnesses in terms of why people should care? So what?
Yes, Senator, that's not the first time I've been asked, so what? And I'll give you, and the reason being is that cases I've worked in the United States, and again, Hezbollah is very, very cautious about attracting the attention of law enforcement. They don't get involved in large-scale bank fraud that they're going to attract the attention of the FBI or Secret Service. And they don't get involved in bank robberies or violent crime to attract the attention of the police. There is a no man's land, insurance fraud, credit card fraud, tobacco tax evasion that makes millions of dollars without any kind of oversight. And this money, Senator, is utilized to purchase dual-use equipment that has drastically affected the lethality of Hezbollah attacks overseas, has garnered together support for Hezbollah cells in the United States. So what? That's why.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse. Thank you for being here. I'm glad at least we can agree on one thing, that political violence is unacceptable, no matter where it comes from. But I want to talk about the leadership and what some leaders have said, which I believe has contributed to that political violence. In 2018, when Nancy Pelosi was asked about policies she disagreed with, instead of saying she would do her job and legislate or try to persuade people to the contrary, she replied, "I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be." About that same time, Kamala Harris was asked about being stuck in an elevator with President Trump, Mike Pence, and Jeff Sessions. And she replied while laughing, "Does one of us have to come out alive?" And then there's this, Mr. Schumer. In March 2020, the majority leader of the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer, said about Supreme Court justices the following: "I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you. In August 2020, Representative Ayanna Pressley said, "There needs to be unrest in the street," encouraging rioters. Then Maxine Waters said in 2021 that Democratic rioters should, quote, "get more confrontational," close quote, with police. She said, "If you see anybody from Trump's cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gas station, you get out and create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere." And then in 2023, Delegate Stacey Plaskett said on MSNBC that President Trump needs to be shot. In 2024, President Biden told Democratic donors that it was time to put Trump, this is the President of the United States, told Democratic donors it was time to put Trump in the bullseye. And recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted in an Instagram story that people should resist ICE. And then Jasmine Crockett, a member of the House of Representatives from the state of Texas. Kayla Hamilton was a young woman who was sexually assaulted and strangled to death by an illegal alien, an MS-13 member. I lead a bill named in her honor here in the Senate. Representative Jasmine Crockett called Kayla Hamilton a, quote, "random dead person." We've talked about the person, the would-be assassin that was going to kill Justice Kavanaugh, and of course the assassination attempts on President Trump. Does everybody on the panel feel like or believe that the individuals who actually commit acts of violence should be held accountable? Would you raise your hand? So we agree. Acts of political violence are unacceptable, and the individual who commits those acts should be held accountable. But I want to talk about the political leadership that I think has a greater responsibility, people who serve as the elected representatives of the American people. Is there anybody believe that they bear no responsibility for inciting or encouraging acts of violence? Well, we've always had, in our course of our nation's history, people who are ideologically driven to violence, anarchists, maybe the historical antecedent of Antifa, people motivated by ideological reasons. But I believe that leaders elected to Congress should not say or do things which suggest that political violence is acceptable. And the examples I read to you just now, I think, should be condemned. Groups continue to incite violent protests and impede the enforcement of our immigration laws. We will examine how groups, primarily on the left, and even elected officials at the federal, state, and local level continue to vilify immigration enforcement officials who are simply carrying out their duties required under the law. We'll discuss how the mainstream media gaslights the public about the true scope of criminal alien activity in the United States. But first, let me take a moment to remind everyone how we got to this point. President Biden invited millions of unvetted illegal aliens into the United States. These included hundreds of thousands of criminal aliens, violent gang members, and even individuals on the terror watch list. And where did these aliens go? They went to neighborhoods in major cities across the United States. These criminal aliens took up residence in states, counties, and cities that call themselves sanctuary cities like Los Angeles, Portland, and Chicago. Sadly, many of these communities have suffered for decades under the weight of failed policing mandates. The influx of millions of illegal aliens exacerbated the failure of these policies, resulting in skyrocketing crime. Local residents have begged their elected leaders to reverse course and to address rising crime, but to no avail. To add insult to injury, imagine their surprise when they learned that these Biden-era illegal aliens were prioritized for all types of public services, including housing, schooling, and medical care funded by their tax dollars. In some cities, police departments were hamstrung by budget cuts in order to prioritize spending on illegal immigrants. Thankfully, President Trump has listened to these concerns and fulfilled one of his most important campaign promises: to secure the border and remove illegal aliens from the United States. Aggressive immigration enforcement is not unprecedented, nor is it a particularly partisan issue. The reality is that President Obama, who was once praised for unifying the country, deported more than 2.5 million illegal aliens, earning him the title the deporter-in-chief at some point. But ever since President Trump was sworn into office and began prioritizing immigration enforcement, assaults and attacks on immigration agents and officers have skyrocketed. These immigration officers are law enforcement officers that are doing what their country has asked them to do, which is to enforce our laws, just like every other law enforcement officer. They carry out their sworn duties to uphold the law and arrest those who violated our laws. And make no mistake, we're talking about the arrests of criminal aliens who have committed some of the most heinous crimes: murder, rape, sexual abuse and molestation of children, aggravated robbery and assault, kidnapping, human smuggling, theft, and even acts of terrorism. But you don't have to take my word for it. DHS has published dozens of press releases highlighting the criminal aliens whom ICE and CBP have apprehended. These criminal aliens were hiding in the United States, some for years, and were allowed to continue terrorizing American communities. DHS has reported that currently more than 415,000 illegal aliens in the United States already have criminal convictions. 415,000. Of that number, nearly 400,000 aren't even detained. They're still out there somewhere in our neighborhoods wreaking havoc. There is, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation spread among the American public by the news media and the social media, especially regarding the current laws that authorize our immigration enforcement officers and what they are allowed to do and what they're required to do, and why they have to go into these communities to arrest illegal aliens, especially in so-called sanctuary cities. Immigration enforcement officers are well-trained, and many with years of experience. The only reason that ICE and CBP must go out in our streets and seek out and arrest criminal aliens is because sanctuary cities simply refuse to cooperate with law enforcement and allow them to be transferred directly from jail if detained. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, there are currently 12 sanctuary states and more than 200 sanctuary cities and counties across the United States. Many of them have passed laws that prevent their police department from cooperating with immigration enforcement or sharing information about detained or incarcerated aliens or honoring DHS detainers. Consequently, criminal aliens are often released back into their communities, inevitably to reoffend rather than being detained before being placed into custody. This practice is not only defies common sense, but it makes the role of immigration enforcement officers much more difficult and, in the end, more painful for these communities. The mainstream media, unfortunately, has shown no willingness to educate the public. Instead of reporting these realities truthfully, mainstream media outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and ABC have ignored the real harm that these criminal aliens have caused in these communities and instead directed their ire toward law enforcement. I want to be sure, however, to praise those reporters who do their job honestly, who've called out false statements when they see them on social media or otherwise. That is also an important function of the media, and it does not go unnoticed. Here's one example where Bill Malugin of Fox News points out a social media post depicting an infant with handcuffs on as false, which is, of course, comes from TikTok. TikTok is owned by the Chinese government in part and operates under the rules set by the Chinese Communist Party and is famous for their propaganda and disinformation efforts. But here's an example of how TikTok is sowing dissension among Americans by suggesting somehow that U.S. law enforcement officials are doing things like detaining an infant, and it looks like even putting them in handcuffs, which is obviously a false statement, false depiction. We also know that some of our Democratic colleagues have used incendiary rhetoric to fan the flames of public protests that are anything but mostly peaceful. The result has been widespread assaults on our law enforcement officers. Protesters and criminal aliens have physically attacked officers. Officers have been pepper sprayed, choked, punched, or even injured to the point of hospitalization. Protesters have made violent threats against ICE officers, comparing them to fascists and Nazis, inciting more violence against immigration officers who are, again, simply doing the job that Congress has asked them to do. They are enforcing federal laws. They've rammed officers with vehicles, thrown tear gas, smoke grenades, rocks, bottles, and even punched and shot at our ICE officers. Left-wing protesters have laid down in the road in an attempt to prevent vehicles from belonging to law enforcement from entering or leaving detention facilities, and even slashed the tires on government vehicle cars, all to prevent ICE and CBP from doing their jobs. These groups have also interfered with the capture of illegal aliens, including facilitating the escape of a convicted child rapist and an alien convicted for narcotics and weapons possession. Some of these protesters are outright lunatics, and I don't use this word lightly. Anyone watching the news has seen protesters from every corner of the radicals' left base. We've seen everything from straight-up thugs committing physical violence to activists dressed as dinosaurs and rabbits, and in some costumes that I won't even hazard a guess as to what they are trying to represent. We've even seen some dancing grandmas trying to stop enforcement of our immigration laws, one Jane Fonda dance move at a time.
5, 6, 7, now through the grapevine. Good job. Mom, to you the beat the eye. Reach up. Mom, to you the beat the eye.
Well, suffice it to say, some of these activists have become so divorced from reality as to be characterized accurately as unhinged. But when you give protesters information about who is being targeted and why, suddenly they see the wisdom of this action.
Hey, y'all, be careful. They're arresting people at work here. Hardworking Americans who build, the ones who do all your landscaping, work on your cars, fix all your stuff. They're coming out here taking them all. They're coming out here just taking everybody at work. Be careful, everybody. Don't go to work today.
Where you work, child sex crimes, so.
Oh, you do? Yeah. Never mind. Weirdo. Never mind. Beto.
Many of us look to law enforcement officers for protection in cases of robbery, burglary, or assault. Why can't we extend the same level of respect to law enforcement officers who will carry out our other laws that Congress has passed, like our immigration laws? The left sometimes calls themselves the party of the people, but they don't seem to have much regard for their fellow man and woman when they engage in tactics designed to impede ICE and CBP from getting criminal aliens off our streets and out of the United States. Why is the radical left so intent on protecting illegal aliens over U.S. citizens who are suffering the consequences of violent crime? To me, that is the most important question that remains unanswered. I now recognize Senator Padilla, the ranking member.
Senator Cornyn. I'd like to ask the witnesses, what would be the impact on the United States economy and national security if we failed to assist in the defense of Taiwan? Go for it.
I'm happy to start, sir. So great question. I think I'll let Rush talk about some of the other indicators in his testimony, but from a security perspective, sir, the loss of Taiwan as this, quote, unsinkable aircraft carrier would be completely irreversible. We would lose our ability to access the first island chain and the rest of the region. We would obviously lose a close, vibrant democratic partner. The list goes on and on and on.
Would President Xi stop there, in your opinion?
My belief is no.
Mr. Doshi, Dr. Doshi.
Sure. Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. I think it is the important question because the American people would suffer if we were not to stand with Taiwan in a scenario like that. Let me just offer 3 quick points. The first one, obviously, is the economic cost of war itself, which would be 10% of global GDP, a Great Depression, essentially, a second Great Depression. But there's another factor as well, because maybe they're able to take Taiwan without firing a shot. Maybe Taiwan capitulates. Even in that situation, we're seeing, what we would see is an Asia that's no longer favorably inclined towards the United States. A world in which Asia is sort of no longer accessible to us. We're locked out of Asia, where Asian states bandwagon with China. And we have to assume that'll happen because right now China is half of all regional military spending and half of all Asian GDP. So they might just say, well, we'll work with China, we'll accommodate their power. That'd be a world in which the United States could not reindustrialize. We are correctly focused on building back manufacturing capabilities in this country. President Trump and President Biden focused on that. But Asian investment is critical. They still know how to make the things that we want to make. They may not be able to do so if that's subject to veto from China and if their supply chains are subject. So to bring it home to the average American, it's not just the cost of the war, it's also the question of what our business model will be as a country. Will we bring back manufacturing? And if we don't stand with Taiwan, I think it'll be very hard to do that.
If I could just add one additional point, and I agree with my fellow witnesses, using force has not been central in Chinese foreign policy. Really since 1979 when they took some actions and invaded Vietnam. I believe that if they actually took Taiwan by force successfully, that consideration of use of force would become much more central in PRC foreign policy, whether we're talking about against Japan, South China Sea, against some of the claimants, or potentially against India. And as their capabilities continue to improve, much farther from their shores.
During the first Trump administration and then during the Biden administration, we worked on shoring up the supply chains of advanced semiconductors, recognizing the dominance of Asia in that production of these essential ingredients of everything with an off and on switch. What would be the impact on the U.S. economy, Dr. Doshi, if we were denied access to TSMC and maybe even Samsung's production capability in South Korea?
Well, thank you, Senator, and for your leadership on this issue in particular. Let me just say the impact would be catastrophic. The entire AI build-out in the United States is made in Taiwan. All the chips are from there. All the advanced nodes that we need for those data centers come from Taiwan. A world in which—
Is that where NVIDIA has their chips manufactured?
Yes, Senator, that's exactly right. Virtually every single NVIDIA chip of significance is made in Taiwan. And so there is no AI data center build-out. There is no AI industry without Taiwan's fabs. The result of China having not only destroyed those fabs in the case of war, but perhaps occupying those fabs if Taiwan is peacefully taken, it would mean that our entire AI future is in the hands of Beijing. And because AI is the most transformative technology we know of, and because we don't have the industrial advantage to go head-to-head against China, this is the one lead we do have, compute, AI chips. If we lost that, we would probably lose the 21st century.
If in fact the consequences of Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be so catastrophic to our economy and national security, does a policy of strategic ambiguity make sense, Ms. Dickey? And let's go down the line.
My belief is that the policy of strategic ambiguity still continues to serve the best interests of this country because it gives the President of the United States, regardless of administration, the most decisional flexibility in a crisis or a contingency.
Senator, I do believe that this policy of strategic ambiguity has one significant advantage, which is that it also incentivizes Taiwan to invest in its defense. And every pound of material that Taiwan builds or has deployed on its island is worth, 1,000 what we have across the horizon, because it's harder for us to get there. So I'd like them to have skin in the game, and this makes sure that they do.
I believe that strategic ambiguity continues to serve American interests, that it is, there would be a risk of it being interpreted in Beijing if the United States said we would defend Taiwan under all circumstances, that it might actually provoke the attack that we're seeking to deter, especially if Beijing perceives that we really don't have the capability at present to defend Taiwan. I also agree with both of my fellow witnesses that we should not tie the hands of the president. But we have to ensure we have the capability, so we have to have the credible military threat. And I think that is one of the most important ingredients in order to support continued strategic ambiguity.
Thank you.